When you think of Mexico, what pops into your mind? Maybe those gorgeous beaches, or let's be honest, those tasty tacos. Or perhaps it's the impressive ancient pyramids that seem to stretch toward the sky. Or maybe music filling the air and that unique energy of streets bustling with life, especially in Mexico City. Mexico stretches from the US up north down to Belize and Guatemala in the south, with the Pacific Ocean on one side and the Gulf of Mexico on the other. It's a treasure trove of diversity and history. But beyond all that, there is a fascinating story about a leader who is shaking things up, Claudia Sheinbaum. Not just your everyday politician, she is a scientist, a trailblazer, and the first female president of Mexico, elected in 2024. Now, with her ambitious reforms, the question buzzing around is, can she rewrite Mexico's story? But before diving into that debate, it's crucial to understand the leader at the center of these changes. So, who is Claudia Sheinbaum? Born in 1962 in Mexico City, Claudia grew up in a household where science and social justice were the main topics of discussion over dinner. Her mom, Annie Pardo, was a renowned biologist and a Bulgarian Jewish migrant, while her dad, Carlos Sheinbaum, was a chemical engineer who came from Lithuania. Both were heavily involved in the leftist student movements of the 60s. When Claudia was just 6 years old, her parents took part in the 1968 Mexican student movement, which fought for democratic freedoms against an authoritarian government. Sadly, this ended in tragedy during the Tlatelolco massacre, where the Mexican military opened fire on unarmed protesters just days before the Olympics. Claudia was influenced by her parents' tireless activism. She is very different from her predecessor, López Obrador, though she is a political heir, but her leadership style is very different. He was very fiery and charismatic. On the other hand, she has a very calm demeanor. What do you make of her leadership style so far?
She's a free thinker of sorts, not very tied by her ideological leanings. She's a granddaughter of Jewish immigrants. Her parents were also active in the student agitation of 1968. So that makes her a very nuanced politician. She is more like a scientist stateswoman rather than a populist agitator. So she blends quiet power with purposeful reform. And her leadership style reflects a shift from charisma to competence in the Latin American leadership style.
Claudia started her studies in physics at the renowned National Autonomous University of Mexico, wrapping up her undergrad in 1989. But that was just the beginning. She did her master's in energy engineering, diving deep into research on air pollution and energy consumption right in her home country. One of her standout projects included improving wood-burning stoves in indigenous communities. Claudia did not just stop with her studies. She co-authored over 100 scientific articles and contributed to the Nobel Prize-winning Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, on a personal note, she married fellow academic Carlos Sheinbaum in 1987. In the early 90s, Claudia moved to Northern California as an academic immigrant and lived in Stanford housing with her husband and children, conducting research at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. During this time, she dove into social issues and actively protested against the North American Free Trade Agreement, that is NAFTA, a trade agreement signed in 1994 by the US, Canada, and Mexico. She voiced concerns against NAFTA, saying that it will affect Mexico's vulnerable populations. Fast forward, she separated from Carlos in 2016 and recently in 2023 married physicist Jesus Maria Thariba in a private ceremony. Claudia Sheinbaum's passion for public service propelled her from the confines of the lab to the world of politics. It all kicked off with her joining the leftist party of the Democratic Revolution, but in 2014 she teamed up with the left-wing Morena party alongside Andrés Manuel López Obrador, better known as AMLO.
Her ascendancy to the presidency is, that's an era which is called El Tiempo de Mujeres, that is, it's time of the women. And that's that moment. And, her campaign was also about let's continue to make history. So she didn't want to digress from the cliched position of the Mexican polity and her mentor to that extent. But, some of her educational background or the family that she comes from also is very important to shape her leadership style.
Sheinbaum took on the role of Environment Secretary in Mexico City, later becoming the city's head of government in 2018. She faced some serious challenges like navigating the COVID-19 pandemic and responding to the tragic metro collapse that claimed at least 26 lives. Come 2024, AMLO's presidential term came to an end due to a single term limit, despite an approval rating of around 70%. And so AMLO's longtime protege Sheinbaum stepped up, defeating her main rival Xochitl Galvez by a stunning margin, nearly 60% of the vote. Her victory wasn't just about her political prowess, it was deeply tied to AMLO's legacy and the popularity of his social programs. During her campaign, she leaned into their close relationship, with AMLO even accompanying her on a victory tour.
So an energy engineer, former mayor of Mexico City. So Claudia, even though she is one of the left-leaning coalition, which is called the Morena, Movimiento Regeneración Nacional, or the National Regeneration Movement. This party was formed in 2014. So if you see Mexico, which has a PRI, which has given almost all the presidencies for a very, very long time. So relatively, this is a very, very new party. And this party didn't contest alone. There was a coalition with two smaller parties, that is the Labour Party, and then there was an evangelical conservative party. She had a landslide victory, although speculations were that she would win modestly, but she had a historic margin with which she won, capturing the largest share of votes since 1982.
One of the standout moments of her early presidency, a public apology on the anniversary of the Tlatelolco massacre, where she vowed to never let security forces be used against the people again, calling herself the daughter of 68. According to various polls, Claudia Sheinbaum's approval ratings are hovering between 70% and 85%. Her security policy focuses on four main strategies.
Lo primero que es muy importante es no va a regresar la guerra contra el narco de Calderón. No buscamos ejecuciones extrajudiciales, que era lo que ocurría. ¿Qué vamos a usar? Prevención, atención a las causas, inteligencia y presencia en esta estrategia de 4 ejes.
First off, she is tackling the roots of crime through poverty reduction and creating opportunities for the youth. Then, there is the consolidation of the National Guard under military leadership, boost in tech for intelligence, and finally a tight coordination between federal and state authorities, especially in high crime zones. Speaking of crime, there has been a notable drop in Mexico's homicide rate, 22.4% since she took office. However, concerns about corruption and public safety are ever present. Over 125,000 people reported missing in Mexico as of May 2025. Her tenure so far saw the government intensifying its crackdown on organized crime, resulting in the seizure of 134.7 tons of drugs, including over 2 million fentanyl pills. Authorities dismantled 644 clandestine drug labs across 17 states and prosecuted numerous individuals linked to fentanyl distribution. But Sheinbaum's tougher approach does raise eyebrows. Could it lead to potential state overreach? She recently pushed for Mexico's first ever judicial elections on 1st of June 2025 to replace appointed judges with those elected directly by the people.
Cerca de 13 millones de mexicanas y mexicanos salieron a ejercer por primera vez en la historia su derecho a decidir quiénes deben ser las y los nuevos ministros, magistrados y jueces.
But the fear is real. Drug cartels might try to sway elections by supporting their own candidates.
Para el país va a ser simplemente cerrar, mandar a la tumba al Poder Judicial y a un último contrapeso que teníamos contra el autoritarismo del Ejecutivo.
Absolutamente todo. Porque se pierde la República, se pierde la separación de poderes y entramos a una dictadura de facto.
When you talk about all these achievements in her tenure, let's not forget that there is a huge debate going on over judicial elections, which happened on 1st of June 2025. You know, a lot of people say that this is another measure to, clamp down on civil liberties and, increase more state involvement, and drug cartels, supporting their own candidates who will then infiltrate into the judicial system and will enable more organized crime.
What happened was Obrador had brought in a lot of constitutional reforms. And so therefore, when she comes to power, it is presumed that she will carry forward those constitutional reforms because AMLO was her predecessor and her political mentor. So she was supposed to carry that. But where she digressed was that on June 1st, 2025, she held elections for judiciary and all levels of judicial officers, including the highest level of judges and the lower level of magistrates and all, were to be selected through this process. So this is a first set of judicial election, but the voter turnout was dismal. It was very, very low, less than 20%. If I remember, it was only 13%. Therefore, there was a lot of criticism, but she, withstood these criticism. She held on to the fact that, she is going to these elected judges will have a different take because they don't have a legacy, they don't have a baggage of arrogance. So this is what she has presumed. Now, critics argue that this process of election of judges undermines meritocracy because what she's going to do is popularly elected judges, which are then have a constituency which has elected them to be answerable to. And she insists, Sheinbaum has rejected these criticisms. And she has put forward her own logic, which is that this will only make Mexico more democratic and root out corruption in a system which is, rampant in Latin American countries. So corruption in judiciary, in bureaucracy is rampant. And this is her take on how to counter corruption in judiciary.
Mexico under AMLO also bragged about the policy of hugs, not bullets, in which its leaders avoided confrontations with drug cartels. But that approach is now shifting.
We all know that Obrador's policy of hugs, not bullets had failed. So, because he had also created this quasi-military National Guard to tackle crime and violence. She continues with this National Guard, but the extent of hugs, not bullets, she has moved away from that. And she has also, Obrador had cut down the budget of the police. She has increased the budget. And that was one of the reasons why violence had increased during Obrador's period. So she has now scaled it up. So her emphasis, therefore, in security is to allow zero impunity through stronger intelligence, judicial accountability, and dismantling of criminal structures.
Claudia Sheinbaum, a climate reformer, is shaking things up in Mexico with her finger on the pulse of sustainable energy. She is pushing for a shift away from the traditional fossil fuel heavy approach.
The earlier laws had liberalized the energy sector and allowed private players to come in. She has stopped this. So the prime role or the lead role in any kind of energy issues will be taken by the National Petroleum Agency, which is Pemex. Because unlike AMLO, who was more pro fossil fuels like petroleum, she is more pro renewables. She has pledged to increase investment in solar and wind energy, especially through state-led initiatives. As a former mayor of Mexico City and a climate scientist, which is her background, she has launched the solar rooftop programs like we have in India. In some of the cities, we've designed that. If you look at any of the multilateral and climate change negotiations, given her environmental background, Sheinbaum may seek a greater role in any kind of climate change negotiations. And she has been so far able to project Mexico as a climate progressive leader from the global south.
On the international stage, Sheinbaum faces a storm. The US imposed sweeping tariffs on Mexican goods, citing immigration and drug trafficking. Sheinbaum pushed back, warning of economic harm and negotiating border security measures, all while defending Mexico's interests.
If you look at her leadership style, which is calm, methodical, pragmatic, rather than engaging in public confrontations, she focuses on quiet, impactful actions. And I'm sure we know how she had shown a video where, Trump wanted to rename Gulf of Mexico as Gulf of America. And she shows an old map and says, why can't we say Mexican America? So this is her style, very calmly, but very impactful actions she has.
When protests erupted in Los Angeles following a sharp increase in immigration raids and mass deportations, US Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem publicly blamed Claudia Sheinbaum. She said Sheinbaum came out and encouraged more protests. In response, Sheinbaum condemned the violence during the protests but defended the right of the Mexican-American community to demonstrate, urging them to remain peaceful and not to fall into provocations.
El día de ayer, cuando la secretaria de Seguridad Interior hace esta declaración, pues inmediato dijimos es absolutamente falso. Totalmente falso. Nunca hemos llamado a las acciones en Los Ángeles. Ahora, siempre defendemos a los mexicanos allá, es nuestra labor.
The relationship between US-Mexico, when she assumed office on October 1, many doubted her ability to manage, and she was a woman, and it's a very patriarchal society. So they thought she will not be able to manage the US-Mexico relations, especially if Trump comes to power. But a leftist and a former scientist, Sheinbaum, she was, considered reserved compared to her predecessor, Obrador. But he had a very, as you said, a very fiery, direct relationship with Trump in his previous stint. Yet she surprised critics by not only standing firm against Trump's aggressive trade policies, as you've seen, the tariff rules, then how she has said that don't provoke us, in terms of don't pinpoint that we are the protesters. About the treatment which is given to the US nationals within, Mexican nationals within United States, she has clearly and in firm words opined, we don't agree with the scheme of criminalizing working people. While Mexicans in the United States send $10 million to Mexico in remittance, 80% of their earnings remain within United States, which means they are contributing a lot to the US national economy. She has chosen to communicate with Trump in English, right? Unlike her predecessor, AMLO, who was hell-bent on talking in Spanish. And this direct engagement in one language without any interpreter leads to a very smooth dialogue between the two leaders. So that is another aspect.
Sheinbaum reached out to world leaders from the US and China to France and India. But she also stirred controversy by sending invitations to figures like Russia's Vladimir Putin and Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro to her inauguration, leaders who are often at odds with Western democracies. So what lies ahead for Mexico under Claudia Sheinbaum?
Definitely, it's a digression from the past. That she's a mujer, a woman at the helm. She's projected to become a very, very, impactful political leader or president is because she has a majority in both houses of the Congress. And this has helped her in advance her agenda and of her party as well. So all the constitutional reforms are likely to be seen through. They will be voted.
Now the real question is, will her audacious outreach redefine Mexico's place in the world or ignite storms she can't control? Only Time will tell.